My name is Serena and I'm calling from Nashville. And the cultiest thing about working in restaurants is how normalized and encouraged it is to work from open to close nearly every day of the week. Whether you're sick or have a family or it's a holiday, it's expected for you to be there.
Hi, I'm Ayana from Wilmington. The singular most cultish thing, in my opinion, is people, especially cooks and chefs, always saying, we do it to make people happy. It's usually not the case. They do it to stroke their own egos, and all the other cultish things that happen stem from people needing that. There is someone they're emulating, and they endure abuse to do so and only socialize with other restaurant people, and they do not know how to exist in the outside world, and they become blind to the problematic and toxic behavior that is rife in that industry.
There's always this weird undercurrent of relationship, whether you're like pleasing your manager or whether your manager doesn't like you. It like actually has a really big impact on what it's like to work there.
This is Sounds Like a Cult, a show about the modern-day cults we all follow. I'm Issa Medina, and I'm a comedian.
And I'm Amanda Montell, author of the book Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism. Every week on our show, we discuss a different group or guru that puts the cult in culture, from the troubled teen industry to the Kardashians, to try and answer the big question.
This group sounds like a cult, but is it really?
To join our cult and see culty memes and behind-the-scenes pics, follow us on Instagram at Sounds Like a Cult Pod.
I'm on Instagram at Issa Medina, ISAAMEDINAA, where you can find all the information on where to see me do live stand-up comedy. I'm going to be performing in San Francisco on Thursday, October 20th. I'm going to be in Los Angeles on Saturday, October 22nd, New York City on November 26th, baby. So go to my Instagram to see information on where to see me live or tell me where to perform, because I do see that, and I'm going to try to go to Australia, but it's far, babes. So that's my Instagram at Issa Medina, ISAAMEDINAA.
Also, Amanda here. I wanted to let you know that I have some really fun culty events coming up for my book, Cultish. I'm going to be speaking in DC in October 2022. I'm going to be in Salt Lake City in November. I'm going to be in LA. So you can find the info for that at my website, amandamontell.com/events, or on my Instagram. I hope to see you there. And feel free to check us out on YouTube, where you can watch our show. Or if you want to support us further, you can hit us up on Patreon at patreon.com/soundslikeacult. One of our favorite sponsors of all time is Dipsea, which offers hundreds of short, sexy audio stories designed by women for women.
Dipsea is offering an extended 30-day free trial at dipseastories.com/cult. That's 30 days of full access for free when you go to dipseastories.com/cult.
dipseastories.com/cult.
Today's episode is sponsored by Honey, the easy way to save when shopping on your iPhone or computer.
If you don't already have Honey, you could be straight up missing out. And by getting it, you'll be doing yourself a solid and supporting this show.
I'd never recommend something I don't use. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/cult. That's joinhoney.com/cult.
Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp, easy and affordable online therapy.
When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/cult today to get 10% off your first month.
That's betterhelp.com/cult.
Daily Harvest delivers delicious food built on organic fruits and vegetables. Choose from smoothies, flatbreads, harvest bowls, and more, all ready to enjoy in minutes.
You deserve one less thing to worry about. Let Daily Harvest take care of the fruits and veggies for you. Go to dailyharvest.com/cult to get up to $40 off your first box.
That's dailyharvest.com/cult for up to $40 off your first box. dailyharvest.com/cult.
Today, we are covering the cult of kitchen culture. And we're not talking about your mother's kitchen, not your grandmother's kitchen.
Or your father's kitchen.
Yes.
Or your grandfather's kitchen.
You're absolutely right. That not your mother's axiom, a little sexist.
It is, and I don't know if we're going to touch on this later, but I do find it so insane that like kitchen culture is predominantly male. When people are always telling women to go back into the kitchen, I'm like, oh, okay, in the one place we can do it professionally, you don't accept us.
Yes, because money and glory comes with cooking professionally, and women are supposed to suffer and labor in silence. Anyway, if you couldn't guess, we're talking about the culture of restaurant kitchens, specifically fine dining kitchens. One of the main things that kitchen culture and cults have in common from my perspective is that cults often offer this sort of family and community for those who feel unwelcome in mainstream society. They often target people who are seeking a sense of belonging, but they're also very exclusive and have these barriers to entry and exit that make participants feel like they're some part of an exalted class. And there's a lot of that going on with the people who join the cult of restaurant kitchens.
Kitchen culture, specifically the kind we're going to be talking about today, which is the culture at fine dining restaurants or establishments, breaks down and bonds people in ways that are so similar to the way that cults do it. And a lot of people who end up working in restaurants are similar to the sorts of misfits that kind of wind up in cults. Getting a restaurant job is very much a thing you can do when you are between gigs or when you are looking for your next gig.
Or when you don't have a fucking master's degree.
Yeah.
And when I think of chefs, even who work in some of the fanciest restaurants, I picture these sort of biker dudes, people with a ton of tattoos and like scars on their face. I guess they are working with knives.
Yeah, I always immediately jump to Anthony Bourdain lookalikes
Yes.
and like these people who had either substance abuse issues or a hard time growing up. How do you say that?
A difficult childhood.
Yeah. It's one of the few industries where you really can still work your way up from the bottom. Like you can start as a hostess and then become a server and then become a manager, or you can start as a dishwasher and then move your way up. And you don't see that a lot in other industries these days.
It's true. But to that point, there is this very specific unquestioned hierarchical structure in kitchens that reminds me of the military in a lot of ways and, as it turns out, was sort of derived from military hierarchies. I don't think I've ever asked you this. Have you ever worked in a kitchen? Did you ever work in a restaurant?
The closest I've ever gotten to working at a restaurant is I worked at a froyo shop in high school.
Oh, I see that for you.
I loved froyo. I worked at it for like a year and a half, and after that, I didn't have froyo for like 3 years, but I'm back on my froyo game. I mean, if my favorite froyo brand sponsored the podcast, that's when I really feel like we will have made it.
That would be amazing.
How do you send froyo over the mail? I don't know. Or probably just a gift card. Then I also worked at the concession stand at the pool.
These are such girl next door jobs.
That's where my love for hot dogs comes from. I love hot dogs. That's actually something that you should know about me. I think they're such an easy snack. You can microwave them, you can boil them, you can grill them.
What's your favorite hot dog topping? Because I know mine.
People think it's weird, but I do put mayo on my hot dogs. I put mayo, mustard, ketchup, and onions, and crumbled up chips. It's so good.
God.
That's how you do it in Colombia.
Okay.
We love hot dogs over
All
there.
right.
Last thing on hot dogs is that I love a baseball game hot dog,
Yeah.
like wrapped in tinfoil.
Well, it's cultural. We'll get into this analysis later, but one of the reasons why I think kitchen culture is so intense is because food is so fraught. Like food
Yeah.
represents so much to us. It's not just sustenance for your body, it's your culture, it's your identity, and certainly in restaurant culture, it's your livelihood, it's your legacy.
As we all know and have seen in Ratatouille, food is that moment where the critic in the movie puts the ratatouille in his mouth.
And it's like
it like suctions him into his childhood and reminds him of that moment. That's what
Absolutely.
food does. Have you ever worked in a restaurant, Amanda?
Yeah, I worked in restaurants. My favorite job in high school was I was the front of house hostess at Bertucci's. Did they have that where you grew up? Like
No.
family Italian restaurant.
No.
It's in like Maryland and New Jersey and stuff.
I could see that though, because I feel like also a lot of people who want to pursue the arts have it in their mind that at some point they will have to work at
In a restaurant, for
so it's like
sure.
you were almost like in character of like, I need to work at a restaurant.
I was like cosplaying starving artist.
Yeah.
But I was not starving because when you worked there, you got unlimited free rolls.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
The rolls were amazing.
I actually like wanted to work at a restaurant in high school because a lot of my friends did. They worked at something grill, like suburb vibes.
Yes.
My dad and my mom, they wouldn't let me work at a restaurant because they were like, we didn't move to this country for you to work at a restaurant. They were like, focus on your homework and your work and like get into a good school. When I did the froyo thing, I only was able to do it because I had a stress fracture, so I couldn't run cross country that year.
Your like extracurricular activities were planned out so strategically.
Yeah.
My parents were just like, keep yourself busy, make some money, accomplish much. We'll see you later.
Yeah. Well, my dad in college, he worked at Wendy's. he hated that job. And so he was like, I want to give you a life where like you don't have to work at Wendy's.
Oh, that makes sense. My dad, as some listeners know, spent his teen years in a cult against his will, and the job he had there was like his one beacon of hope. So I definitely came of age with the philosophy that labor can be a bright light in the darkness. But in college, as a hostess in a very swanky, pretentious, head up its rear fucking hotel restaurant in New York City. I remember when I applied to work there, I'm 18 years old. In the interview, the fucking drinking his own cult leader, Kool-Aid owner of the restaurant, asked me, do you think you can handle working in a restaurant this cool? My job there was literally just to like take room service orders and point people toward the bathroom. So
Yeah.
I don't know what his deal was, whether he was trying to haze me or not, but that very exclusive, pretentious, fratty, but also badass energy is what I think of when I think of these fine dining establishments.
I think the juxtaposition of chefs and other kitchen workers at these fine dining establishments being so rough around the edges while everything in front of house is so pristine actually seems very culty.
Oh, definitely, because it's this very obvious personification of ends justify the means. The implication being that this intense, sometimes abusive aggression backstage is necessary to achieve that ultimate perfection. There's this sort of exclusive secret culture happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, that you can only be a part of if you join the cult and pay your dues. We always wanted to do the cult of kitchen culture because people have told us to, and also it's just culty. But then this summer, the show The Bear came out. We, as well as all of society, became obsessed.
We devoured it, so to speak.
Yeah, we were like, yes, chef, no chef, baby. Everyone's like in bed asking people to like spank them with a freaking spoon, spatula. Everyone's been doing chef dirty talk this summer. Or is that just me? So when we thought of kitchen culture, we were like, we have to talk to someone who's been on the show. But we wanted someone who's also worked in kitchens.
A real chef.
So because we can't cover it all on our own, later in the episode, we're going to be talking to a very special guest who not only acted in the show The Bear, but is a very real and very successful chef who consulted on The Bear to make sure that the show is representing kitchen culture accurately.
The Bear is obviously explosively popular right now, but it isn't the first time that the cult of kitchen culture has cropped up in the zeitgeist. The book Kitchen Confidential was first published in 2000. It became a New York Times bestseller, and that was one of the first pieces of pop cultural media that showed the sort of ugly, culty underbelly of the culinary world.
Also, a lot of people don't know this, but there was a TV show, a sitcom, a scripted show called Kitchen Confidential based on Anthony Bourdain's book. It only got one season because it was horrible, but Bradley Cooper played the lead.
No.
Yeah, and it was essentially, you know, based off of Anthony Bourdain's life, this like chef who has sex in the kitchen. It just never took off in the way that his unscripted shows did.
Well, now we have The Bear.
Yeah.
So we're good. It is worth noting that since the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been this sort of new reckoning within the culinary industry in an attempt to make it less destructively culty. And we do talk about that with our guest. But let's get into some fast facts. What are some events in recent history that have brought the cultiness of kitchen culture into the wider cultural zeitgeist?
Oh, baby, we got some for you. I mean, one topic that people just want us to cover independently is the Bon Appetit Test Kitchen.
Oh my God.
In the summer of 2020, the Bon Appetit Test Kitchen got exposed for exploiting their chefs of color. Also that summer in 2020, a super well-known LA restaurant named Squirrel, which
Overrated.
is actually overrated and down the street from both of us, it got exposed for questionable food handling practices and mistreating their employees. Mm-hmm. And then in early 2021, the New York Times did an expose on the toxic work environment at Willow's Inn. So these are just some recent moments that have inspired that new reckoning of confronting kitchen culture and whether it is toxic or not.
But of course, a cult cannot change its ways overnight, and so there are still these culty aspects. So let's get into our analysis of the cult of kitchen culture.
My name is Isabella, and I think the cultiest part about the restaurant industry is how little they care about their employees. So I worked in a rolled ice cream cafe. The AC turned off. It was like 90 degrees and having to take breaks because we felt like we were going to pass out.
One of the cultiest aspects of the service industry is the trauma bonding. After a very, very tough shift, people will feel closer together and more of a family. It turns into like those are the only people that you hang out with or really care about.
I've had multiple jobs where my manager tried to act like my parent and give me these life advice on how to be a better version of myself, even though during rushes I would find them sitting in the office or just picking the absolute easiest job possible.
So, of course, as we always mention, cults often have a charismatic leader, and that's the chef in restaurants. They are sort of exalted as these enlightened geniuses that you're never supposed to question. As a New York Times piece said, everyone else in the kitchen, from line cooks to servers to dishwashers, even folks eating in the restaurant, are supposed to support that vision at every single turn.
Yeah, and we see that with Iowa Dibbery's character, Sydney, in The Bear, who works at the restaurant, The Beef, so she can have the opportunity just to work under Carmy, this genius chef who happens to be working at a low-budget diner.
She essentially has to, like, fall to her knees and worship him in order to prove herself.
So it's not just the people who work in the kitchen who worship the chef. It's also the patrons of the restaurant, the people who eat at the restaurant, the diners, compliments to the chef. Thank you so much to the chef. They don't think of the whole team that is behind the meal that they just ate. There is this reputation now of chefs as visionary geniuses. That image of chefs rose in large part because the culture that Anthony Bourdain portrayed in his books. The New York Times talked about him upholding a romantic ideal of chefing as the kind of brutal, impossibly demanding, but ultimately meaningful work that exalts misfits and draws them together with a sense of purpose.
It sounds like you're describing a cult. I mean, that's exactly what a cult leader does. Glamorizing that image of the chef who works so hard and puts his blood, sweat, and tears and all his artistic vision into his food, that can lead to glamorizing abuse going on in the kitchen because it's this ends justify the means philosophy of like anything that's necessary to execute his vision. And that cult leaderish image of the chef gives diners something to talk about. It gives them a figurehead to worship themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight the glorification of this toxic culture was in the early 2000s, which was a time when there weren't like many anti-bullying campaigns yet. Having to suck it up and deal with it was still the culture at large, It's like when you're an adult, you just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
You have to deal with abuse, or if your parents hit you when you were a kid, like it just made you stronger. That was in the zeitgeist. That's how people spoke.
You're so right. It's very Gen X, latchkey kid, suck it up, raise yourself. Literally, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Yeah. And now I think things are changing, not just because the culture around bullying is changing and toxicity and people are going to therapy and things like that, but I also think probably because of the push to diversify kitchens more. Kitchens used to be like so homogenous, a lot of like white men, and now people who created a lot of the meals that had been brought to the forefront by white men are now getting in the kitchen. Minorities and women and people of color are now getting to be leaders in the kitchen. So it's a chicken or the egg situation. Were these environments toxic because there weren't any women or people of color, or did people of color and women not want to work in these kitchens because they were toxic?
Yeah, that is a question to be asked in so many of these cult-like industries and groups that are helmed by these exalted white men from Silicon Valley to fine dining. Chefs often detail abuse that they perpetuated in restaurants and still go on to be widely revered.
When you say that, immediately I just think of Gordon Ramsay. I think of the chef who yells at everyone and has no patience, and you're scared to be in the kitchen with them.
Totally. Oh my God. Gordon Ramsay is such a cult leader, but I do fucking love his shows.
I mean, he also has an accent, so it's like, okay, yell at me, daddy. You know what I mean?
Yell at me in my favorite accent, and I'm going to continue to misbehave.
Yeah, although it is weird because, like, he is a father now. I think I'm closer in age to his daughter than I am him, so I'm like, okay, don't yell at me,
That's
daddy.
why he's daddy. Yeah. These moves to diversify kitchens are so recent. 2019. A book by the famous chef Jean-Georges called My Life in 12 Recipes told the story of locking a dishwasher in the walk-in and beating him up as punishment for taking a break while a critic was in the restaurant. So he's essentially bragging about that in a very cult leaderish manner.
Yeah, I don't like that. It seems toxic, it seems narcissistic, and quite frankly, it's just not smart. I mean, we talk about this with our guests later, but it's like you have to appreciate every person in that kitchen because they bring a lot of value to the line, to the kitchen community. If you don't have a dishwasher, you don't have clean plates, and so you don't have something to put your food on.
It really is so culty that this violent, chaotic energy is just what's expected, and because you were the victim of it once, you then perpetuate it, and you think it can't be any other way.
It sounds a lot like, fraternities and sororities. If I was hazed, I'm going to haze. And it also is very narcissist because it's this idea of the chefs thinking, the only thing making this restaurant as good as it is me. And I am irreplaceable. But as we now know, due to the internet, everyone is replaceable. So value your team because you're just as replaceable as they are.
Speaking of the structure of the kitchen, just like cults, kitchens need to have a hierarchy in order for power to be distributed the way that the cult leader wants. You're expected to pay your dues so you can rise in the ranks. The structure and control head chefs have over line cooks breaks them down to keep them in line and thinking that the only way out is to work harder and follow order to move up.
Yeah, I mean, if you work on the line, you likely don't make that much money and you simply cannot afford to quit or be fired. So it forces you to stay in line even when you're being abused. In 2018, the average annual wage for restaurant cooks was around $27,000 a year.
A quote from a restaurant industry employee in an Eater article said, "The only way I could see out of this financial insecurity was to move up. I needed to climb the ladder, and to do that, I couldn't ruffle feathers." And again, to reiterate, a lot of the time, the people who get involved in kitchen culture and the restaurant industry are people who might not have a degree. They don't have a fallback plan. And so they're kind of very cultishly imprisoned in this industry, in this kitchen.
You're going to be like, how did you relate this to Mean Girls? But it reminds me of when someone plays a character for so long that they become the character. I think a lot of these people who start in toxic kitchens probably tell themselves, you know what, I'm just not going to ruffle any feathers because I need to get to the top. And then when I get to the top, I'm going to change the culture.
The benevolent dictator.
Yeah. And so when you get to the top, you've been doing it for so long that it's just who you become.
Yeah, of course.
It's like when, Lindsay Lohan was pretending to be the mean girl and she just became the mean girl.
Yeah, you're cold, hard plastic.
Yeah. And she was like, I didn't know who I was anymore.
Totally. I love that comparison. I'm never mad at a Mean Girls reference.
Yeah.
There's also a very specific hierarchical system in the kitchen industry called the brigade system, where each level has one head and each role within a level will report to that head.
Yeah. And I just learned this off the show, The Bear, but not all kitchens use that system.
Right.
It's seen as one of the stricter systems and antiquated because it is so hierarchical.
And it's French.
Oh
my God, speaking of Ratatouille, it takes place in France. And the character of Colette has a line that I love so much where she's interrupting a press conference and she's like, I hate to be rude, but we're French. That brigade system is what gave the militaristic structure to kitchens in general.
It's weird because it is a community, but it feels like when the system is so strict, people are demeaned for asking people to teach them new things. They're scared, to ask for help. And so I think that creates a culture where individuals aren't growing as people, so then the kitchen isn't growing as a whole.
Like any industry, dissent and diversification is ultimately good for art and progress.
Yeah.
And it's just very cult leaderish that this industry oftentimes doesn't make any room for that.
It's better to teach a person to fish, It's that saying. Yes. Teach a man to fish, then you don't have to hang out with him or look at his fishing pictures.
On Hinge.
On Hinge, yeah.
Oh, God, no. We need to stop teaching
men to fish. Okay. Creating a community where you feel worthless for asking questions and you have fear and intimidation reminds me a lot of Hollywood assistants. It's like you're told that you need to know everything about your boss, but you're not allowed to ask too many questions. This toxic space where you have to tiptoe around people, but it's like, how can you be the best employee if you are scared to ask questions.
This is why we get so many suggestions for this podcast, is because every cultish industry will remind you of the cultish industry that you've been a part of. So long story short, we just have to do the Cult of Hollywood Assistants at some point.
Because I was one.
So you can like get it out of your system.
Yeah.
The way that I did when we did the Cult of Theater Kids. It was very cathartic.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is actually maybe cultiest about kitchen culture is how they demand inordinate amounts of time and dedication to the industry. There is this expectation that you will do anything because chefing is really a spiritual calling, not just a job, not just an art form. Additionally, because you're spending all of your time in the restaurant, you're partying with them at night, you're maybe getting fucked up with them, you like sleep in, get up, do it again. These are the only people that you're seeing. This is the only language and culture that you're participating in. And so then it becomes completely normalized to you. You're isolated from the outside world.
Yeah, it becomes your family. You can't distinguish the line between what's right and what's wrong. And that's where it gets so blurry.
Like a toxic family, like a fundamentalist Mormon family.
Yeah.
Calling any professional team a family has, I think, been widely established as problematic at this point. But because restaurant culture is so all-consuming and so codependent, kitchen dynamics can get really incestuous outside the restaurant, too.
I saw this meme the other day that said bartenders or chefs will say, I know a special place, and then take you to the walk-in.
I remember at that restaurant that I worked in New York City, after your shift, you have your shift drinks, and it's really late at night. Everybody's all up in each other's business. Like you were just screaming and sweating and swearing together, and now you're like getting kind of tipsy and hooking up later and doing blow. I mean, it's obviously not that intense in every single restaurant, but anyone who's read the book Sweet Bitter knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and that's true in a lot of different ways, in the way that you don't question older family members. Like a lot of people who work at restaurants don't question their superiors. I have a friend who works at a small restaurant here in LA. I'm like, I want to go, but the food is so expensive. And she's like, it's really expensive because it has to be, because like they aren't making a profit. And I understand that it's hard to make a profit in small, personally owned restaurants, but they were charging $20 for broccoli. You can still turn a profit on that by charging less. So maybe question your superiors a little bit more.
Yeah, the defensiveness is something that you see in a lot of these cult-like groups, because it's not as if she doesn't have a point, but also you have a point, and the unwillingness to engage in that dialogue without getting super defensive of her higher-ups might be symptomatic of some cultish dynamics.
And speaking of it being an art form, I keep using this word, but it really is that je ne sais quoi about food that makes it like amazing. And so I feel like chefs can get away with so much because this is art. Only my hands could put this together.
If in this analogy, food is God, they're the prophet. They're like, I and only I have a direct line to God.
Speaking of God, there's a new pizza place downtown from the Chef's Table guy.
Oh.
With like the best pizza in America. And they opened one downtown. We should go.
Oh, we should go. So we have been teetering around the name of our guest, but we are so excited to introduce him.
We're going to be talking to Matty Matheson, a Canadian chef, restaurateur, and he also played Neil in The Bear. He was executive chef of Parts and Labor, a restaurant located in Toronto. I mean, he's hilarious and just like seems like a fun hang.
We cannot wait for you to hear this conversation.
So before we get into our sponsors for the day, Issa here, I wanted to let you all know about some stand-up comedy shows I'm going to be doing all over the country. I'm going to be doing a really fun live show called The Cult of Stand-Up Comedy with Issa Medina and friends, where I'm going to be performing live stand-up comedy, baby. And I'm going to bring up some really special, funny comedy guests. You really don't want to miss it. I'm going to be in San Francisco Thursday, October 20th. I'm going to be in Los Angeles Saturday, October 22nd. And I'm going to be in New York City Saturday, November 26th, baby. So go to my Instagram to buy tickets. Tickets are live at Issa Medina, ISAAMEDINAA, or my website, IsabellaMedinamate.com, ISABELLAMEDINAMATE.com, where you can get more information on how to see me live.
You know what friends need to talk about more when they get together?
What?
Their fantasies.
Oh, yeah.
You know? Mm-hmm. That's fun fodder for female-friendly conversation.
Yeah, definitely. But where do you get those ideas? That's where Dipsea comes in.
That is where Dipsea comes in. Dipsea is an app full of hundreds of short, sexy audio stories designed by women for women.
They bring scenarios to life with immersive soundscapes and characters, no matter who you're into or what turns you on. You can find stories about intriguing coworker with a British accent or hooking up with your hot yoga instructor.
Ooh la la. New content is released every week, so between listening to your favorite stories again and again, you can always find something new to explore.
Dipsea also has sleep stories, wellness sessions, and now they also even offer written stories, Amanda.
For listeners of the show, Dipsea is offering an extended 30-day free trial when you go to dipseastories.com/cult.
That's 30 days of full access for free when you go to dipseastories.com/cult. dipseastories.com/cult. Today's episode is sponsored by Honey, the easy way to save when shopping on your iPhone or computer.
Here's how it works. Imagine you're shopping on one of your favorite sites. When you check out, the Honey button, which is just a browser extension you can download very easily, appears automatically, and all you have to do is click Apply Coupons. Wait a few seconds as Honey searches for all the coupons it can find for that site, and if Honey finds a working coupon, you'll watch the prices drop.
And oh boy, will they find a coupon. When I use it, I usually get like a 10 or 15% off. And then like on a good day, you could jump up, to like 50%. You never know, You never know what you're going to find up there.
What have you recently saved on?
I recently saved on a backpack, which is out for delivery right now, actually.
Ooh. Honey doesn't just work on desktop. It works on your iPhone, too. Just activate it on Safari on your phone and save on the go.
If you don't already have Honey, you could be straight up missing out. And by getting it, you'll be doing yourself a solid and supporting this show.
I never recommend something I don't use. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/cult. That's joinhoney.com/cult. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. It can be tough to train your brain to stay in problem-solving mode when faced with a challenge in life, but when you learn how to find your own solutions, there's no better feeling. A therapist can help you become a better problem solver, making it easier to accomplish your goals no matter how big or small.
I feel like a lot of us, especially during the pandemic, leaned on family and friends for support, but it's so important to find someone who is there to help just you.
Yeah, I have fallen into the trap of going to my friends who have mental health training or are therapists for advice, but that's not their job, and they obviously aren't objective.
Exactly.
So during the pandemic, I actually used BetterHelp, and it was so nice, especially because they have all these accredited therapists who you can chat with.
It's really convenient, accessible, affordable, and like you said, it's entirely online.
Get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey, and you can switch therapists anytime.
When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/cult today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/cult. The leaves are falling and back to life feels are kicking in. Think fresh start, new routine, and jam-packed to-do lists. Thankfully, Daily Harvest keeps me going with easy-to-prep food built on organic ingredients that I can actually feel good about.
Daily Harvest delivers delicious harvest bowls, soups, flatbreads, snacks, smoothies, lattes, and more built on organic fruits and vegetables.
I love that about them because there's so many things that we get delivered to our home now, so there's just a lot of packaging.
Ugh.
But now you know it's not bad for the environment. And Daily Harvest works directly with farmers to source the best type of ingredients. They freeze their ingredients at peak ripeness to lock in nutrients and flavor, and they never use artificial preservatives or artificial ingredients. So everything stays fresh in your freezer until you're literally ready to enjoy it.
It's ideal for people who can't cook like me. You deserve one less thing to worry about. Let Daily Harvest take care of the fruits and veggies for you. Go to dailyharvest.com/cult to get up to $40 off your first box.
That's dailyharvest.com/cult for up to $40 off your first box. dailyharvest.com/cult. Just to start off, do you want to tell our listeners who you are and how you're connected to the cult of kitchen culture?
I'm Matty Matheson. I'm a part of restaurants. I've only kind of worked in restaurants my entire life, except for like some small shitty jobs in early high school. So like most of my life, I've only worked in restaurants. I'm devoted to feeding people.
And we enjoy eating.
We do, especially
we appreciate it.
Eating's pretty good.
Eating has always been the human pastime.
I just had a peanut butter and jelly on my way here. It was delicious.
That's a nice sandwich.
Underrated, I believe.
On white bread or like a whole grain?
White bread. Admittedly, it was an Uncrustable.
When we say the cult of kitchen culture, how do you interpret that? In other words, intuitively, what do you think restaurant kitchens and cults have in common?
Well, I think there's a lot of common traits. In most restaurants, there's usually a chef or somebody in charge of that restaurant that usually has ultimate power. Most businesses have a boss. And I think that chefs most of the time have a very large ego and higher power or godlike ego or Superman type ego, Nietzsche's and all that stuff. And then people want to be a part of those cultures, be a part of those restaurants. I want to go work here. I want to be a part of that without knowing exactly what that could be. It's like Twin Peaks, like, the bugs crawling in the fucking dirt and you find a finger. You don't really know what it really is until you get in there and you're like, oh, is this what I thought it was? I thought we're all just like smoking weed, hanging out, looking at flowers and fucking. I don't know if that's what this is, And so I think restaurants and cults probably have a lot in common. And then they're praised and then they're hated and then they're built up and they're destroyed and falsehoods or romanticisms around them. I'm always like, anyone can walk off the street and become a chef. You can go and work. You can start as a dishwasher and work your way up. And you don't need some degree. It's a place of the fringe, the neglected. It's a place for a lot of people that can kind of go and just get a job. And you can make money. You can be anything and then just be like, I'm going to go serve tables. And you make money that night, cash. There's so much folklore around restaurants. And I don't know. It's all quite sickening,
You really hit the nail on the head. You were like, I thought we were all looking at flowers, smoking weed, and fucking. And like that could describe any cult in history.
Yeah.
Or just like a kitchen.
That's absolutely right. And there is like so much sexiness to kitchen culture. I mean, you're feeding people, that's very intimate. But then like the dynamics that emerge between and amongst everyone who works in the kitchen can get like fun and destructive.
Yeah. You mentioned that you started, really early on, like working at restaurants and then slowly developed your career. Could you tell us the story of how you were inducted into the cult of kitchen culture and how you really rose through the ranks?
I went to culinary school just because it was the only school I got accepted to. I applied to 4 different colleges for 4 different things. I got accepted to Humber College in Toronto. And I went because mostly I just wanted to go to Toronto. I wanted to go to the city. I come from a small town. I just wanted to go to like hardcore and punk shows, get out of like my shitty little farm town, which now I live in and have a farm, which is a funny full circle thing. But went to culinary school and then I wasn't really good at anything in high school. I didn't really care for high school. I had a lot of friends. I liked doing drugs and getting drunk on the weekends and having parties and doing all that kind of shit. I always just did literally just enough to get by. I didn't care. I knew I'm not going to be a scientist. I'm not, I'm not going to be an engineer. I'm not going to be any of these things that my parents thought I was going to be. And I don't think they had high hopes to begin with, really. But I think in culinary school, I found that I was good at something naturally. I was always just like the class clown, as you, I'm sure, can imagine. That was my safe place, making fun of authority, I guess, in front of large groups of people. Culinary school was like, oh, I can do this. I could make a stock. I could debone a chicken. I could make a remoulade. I could make hollandaise relatively easy. It didn't seem too stressful to pour clarified butter into eggs and whip it up.
You're like a pilot. You could have like this life and all these interests and stuff, but when you're in the plane, you have like really steady hands.
Yeah. Well, I certainly do now. I've had a long history of opening and closing restaurants and working in some of the best restaurants in Toronto. I even dropped out even though I was good at it because I was like, punk enough, didn't need a piece of paper to tell me what to do. Yeah. So, I dropped out of college and then just went on tour with my friend's band. Got a job at like this bistro, which happened to be the best bistro in Toronto. And it was like this magical place. It was all types of people.
Well, the feelings of acceptance and transcendence that you're describing that you found when you first entered culinary school in your first kitchen and then having exposure to like this eclectic group of people that you maybe didn't have access to before, it really does sound like a lot of the cult origin stories. But
the biggest thing that I remember, the different types of people. When you're young, you have like what high school was like, what college was like, and then all of a sudden you're in the world. When you go to work, it doesn't matter if you're cool or if you listen to Dead Moon or the Smiths or whatever. Like when you go into restaurants, all of a sudden you're like, oh, this person's like this actor and this person sings jazz. And all of a sudden at a young age still, be open up to all these different people. And even like working with different line cooks. You're working like, still to this day, one of my best friends is Rang, who was like the chef there at Le Select. Why the fuck would I be friends with some like 50-year-old Vietnamese guy? And it all of a sudden just opens up. I don't know, it gives you kind of human empathy and understanding and being like, oh, just because you're not the same as me makes you just as cool or whatever. It's just like, you're just hanging out, cooking and working 12-hour days. And then you go and drink and you're at after hours and then you're back at somebody's apartment and you go to bed at 8 a.m. and then you're back at the restaurant at 11 and you do that for years. And you're like, this is my team, bunch of freaks.
Yeah, it's a true community. It like blows your world open, but then at the same time, it also becomes your whole world. And that can be insular too.
Yeah, I worked on the Anthony Bourdain documentary. He had addiction before, and then he switched from one cult of like drugs to the cult of like kitchen culture almost and used that as like a replacement. And then he switched to the traveling thing. You replace one lifestyle with another.
There's a void. We want something to fill that void so badly, whether it's drugs or a community or we're chasing something.
Yeah.
Void, the emptiness. We're like a fucking, like a rope bridge floating over some fucking giant crevasse or whatever the fuck. And you're just this like stupid little rope floating over the nothingness, looking over, and you think you can just fill it. And your pockets are filled with only so much junk. Nothing changes. You're still out there alone on that little dangly rope that's moving constantly. Speaking to like the addiction stuff, I'm certainly a workaholic. I have like 55 fucking companies. One of those things where it's just like I stopped doing drugs and drinking and all that stuff, started traveling and doing all that. And it is like one of those things where it's just like, if you're not doing the work spiritually and doing all that kind of stuff, like anything, it's very difficult to find true balance of any sort when you're trying to live any type of dynamic kind of life or a simple life. Like it's very difficult to do anything.
I think a lot of people, when they join a certain community, whether it's a cult or not, they think like, oh, this is it. Like, this is going to solve everything. And it was promised to solve everything. But you're right. Even if you're kind of just sitting still, life is constantly changing around you. And the second you think you have balance, it's fleeting.
I guess restaurants kind of remind me of like social media in a way. You only see the front of the restaurant. You see like the front of the room. You see like the finished product. Everything came together and everything's running smoothly because the servers are like at peace with you at your table. But then behind the restaurant, like social media, it's like all of our lives are so hectic and chaos, but no one's showing that aspect or all the hard work that came to lead to like the front of the restaurant.
Food's interesting. No matter what, when those doors open, everyone needs to be ready. It's a game every day and everyone is there to judge you. Everyone is there to hopefully enjoy you. Some people are coming in to hate you.
It is like social media.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't matter what kind of day anybody was having. Now we're learning that it does matter how people are feeling and it does matter how we deal with that and how we can support people when you're coming into spaces and you're having a bummer day. People don't give a fuck. Like if you went into a dining room, okay, everything's going to be 10% off. But that is going to make everyone's life in the back a little bit worse because then we won't be able to pay benefits. And everybody's sitting down. If we gave you 10% off, would you really care? Or would you take the 10% off? Or would you make the 30 people that made all your food tonight have a little bit happier lives? Just a little bit, not much. I'm sure a lot of people would be like, I'd take 10% off. I'm just eating a salad. I'm just eating a salad. I'm eating a cheeseburger. Like, what do you want from me? It's a tough thing. That type of business, if you're a perfect business operator, you're still profiting at like a 10% margin.
I do feel guilty every time I go out and eat at a restaurant because I have a vague idea of how terribly the financial income business structure is there.
With that being said, do you want to explain the hierarchical structure of the kitchen, what purpose it serves?
How you keep morale high under those circumstances?
The chef usually would be either the face of the cult or the actual cult leader. The biggest secret that nobody really understands either is that most front-facing chefs aren't even probably majority owners of their restaurant.
Yeah, like they're still not the ultimate leader. Like the higher power is the financier.
Right. It's a wild little game out here right now.
At what point did you start taking it seriously? Was it a point where you kind of fell into like someone else's cult?
It's an interesting thing because I never worked under one particular chef that I really believed in, I should say. Also, I became a chef at 26. I liked working. The hours never really bugged me. I can drink and get a fucking bag of Coke after and hang the fuck out and smoke cigs with my friends and tell stories about your childhood till 6, 7 a.m. Then like I'm fucking in it.
I feel like it's very similar to the life of a stand-up comic. It really is just these people who are enjoying themselves and then it creates a career.
I also think it's interesting that you sort of represent the type of person who strikes out on their own and starts their own cult because they realize they don't want to drink someone else's Kool-Aid, so to speak. I think of the analogy with corporate culture. Like there are people who start working at a startup in Silicon Valley and they're like, I really want to realize this CEO's vision. And then there are the people who are like, fuck it, I'm going to start my own startup. And that's sort of like the cult leader type.
I was dumb enough to jump. I'm dumb enough to jump every day. I'll start a business right now.
Is it really dumb though? Like, what do you think that quality is? I don't think it's dumb.
I think it's funny. You're like, I'll start a business right now. I'll walk out the door and I'll start another one.
I'll fucking leave this podcast right now. And go make
You're like, I'll start a fucking podcast. I'll start a rival podcast.
Oh, no, I'm over podcasts, but not doing them. Doing my own. Shout out to Powerful Truth Angels. Shout out to Two-Tone still holding it down. Nothing is sustainable about it. I ran as hard as I could. I don't think I tricked anybody into like opening a restaurant for me. A restaurant was already happening, Oddfellows, and I kind of jumped in on it in the last like month and cooked a menu and they hired me to be the chef. And it was a very small team. It was just like me and 2 cooks and like we had a dishwasher on the weekends. That restaurant in itself is very culty because there wasn't a person that was fucking over 30 that worked there. There'd be like all of us just like sleeping upstairs in the apartment and like no one would sleep and we would just party and we'd be hanging on the roof throwing beer cans at people and like we didn't give a fuck. And people would walk in and we made really good food.
That's kind of like life though. I feel like you just realized it at an earlier age because you jumped. No one ever knows what they're doing. You know, everyone's jumping every day, even like working in corporate America. Like that's a decision you make every day. And people think that there's so much security in a corporate job, but you could get fired tomorrow.
It's the illusion of control that people hang on to so tightly. But let me ask, because I've been always so curious about this. The power structure in kitchens reminds me of the military, but it also reminds me of cults. Why do you think there is that unchecked, unquestioned hierarchy where like you just have to do what the chef says?
I think it comes from like not medieval fucking times, but you know, like it comes from like early 1900s and shit, like Escoffier. They had to be roasting quails perfectly and making petiviers, cakes and things and feeding kings and queens and all these things. And like if something happens and like someone's in trouble, if you take one recipe and give 5 people that thing, you will have 5 outcomes probably.
Right.
You know, it's very difficult to get people to cook the same way and the nuances. Morale's usually not high. It's usually a facade and it's masked with alcoholism and drugs and other things that can come along with being in restaurants. But now it's very different because I left restaurants for like 6, 7 years. And I just did all my vice shit and traveled around and write books and do all that stuff. So it was just like I went and had a whole other life. And then now I'm back into restaurants. I learned what not to do my entire career. And now it's like I get to work with amazing people to do it right, or at least understand what we think is right and then work towards still a moving goalpost, but at least have infrastructure around that to create places that are spiritually, financially, career moving positives. You don't always have to have the answers. Like that's the thing that's amazing where live performance problem solving is such an amazing thing to do. I don't know the answer. Why don't we talk about it? And I'm sure with 5 of us here, we're going to figure something out that makes sense for the group.
It sounds to me it's so important that you like took that time off and stepped away because you mentioned there are so many things that make you hectic in a kitchen and there's that history of the French Brigade. But I also think the timeliness of it. Every meal has to be exactly the same. I don't even make my own meals the same. And the fact that like chefs have to do it the same for an audience is insane.
Just think, everyone has to have everything ready. You have to have every single thing consistent.
LOL. I tried to make duck confit for my parents on Christmas. I ruined Christmas. We got into a huge fight, obviously.
Over the duck?
Over just cooking. And like, I was stressed. So I can't imagine in a real kitchen at a real restaurant.
It's funny that you talk about amputating, because you talking about some of those origins in France, it's like you sometimes see in kitchen culture now, people are so afraid to disobey the chef. Early France, they literally might have gotten the guillotine. Those stakes have really carried over into today.
If a chef is yelling at any moment, that means that they've lost control and they don't know how to articulate, how to speak and communicate to their teams. So that's another thing that a lot of chefs, or mostly men, are pretty bad communicators. How do you communicate with 10, 12, 5, 2, one other person constantly telling them what you want to do or what they want to do, understand what they want to do, then you can help them even. Because a sous chef's job is to give everything to that chef or that chef de cuisine what they need every day, and to understand and to set them up for success. And then the person underneath them is there to set that person up for success. And all of a sudden that chain is broken, and then you look and you're like, you just fucked me. The pressure is unfortunate, but that the pressure is the person sitting at that table doesn't give a fuck.
The way that you describe it, it almost sounds like the customer is the ultimate cult leader. If the customer were just a little bit more empathetic.
Customer's always right. Where the fuck does that come from? People think that like they've been told by society from some fucking thing in the 50s that the customer's always right. Just because you're paying doesn't mean that you're right.
The customer's always right falls into this category of a cult language technique that all cult leaders use called a thought terminating cliche, where once you say it, the conversation shuts down, no dissent, no questioning can follow. Like the customer's always right, the end, fall in line.
The way you described it, having to do the same meal every time, I just wanted to say, and you kind of become desensitized, or it's kind of like changing the wheels in a car. It reminds me a lot of stand-up, just because a lot of stand-ups kind of become like desensitized to their own material so that they can deliver it in the exact same way every time. But it's that same thing of like the meal is kind of a joke. It can hit different with every audience.
I think all good creatives treat it like a trade.
Yeah, you have to. You think that you're special because you can use your knife better than the person next to you? You'll be fantastic if you can teach that person how to brunoise that carrot. If you give them a couple minutes of your time, and instead of looking at them like they're fucking some imbecile, why don't you lift them up? That'll make you a better person. It'll make them a better person. It'll put better mise en place into the fucking kitchen. We're all in this, and we are all here to try to help each other be better every single day. A lot of people think that every restaurant is probably toxic. You're constantly trying because I think people are toxic. It is one of those things where we are the variable. Somebody can come in with a bad mood, and that bad mood sets everybody else off. Everyone, let's take a break. Let's take a moment. Let's air it out. Let's do a little namaste. Jimmy, why are you upset?
It's like a kindergarten talking circle. And speaking of those moving variables and the hierarchy and the positions, do you think that there are any like hidden positions along the hierarchy or secret, unspoken, powerful positions?
Like you never fuck with the dishwashers, you know? And Bourdain was obviously a big fan of that. And they are the heart and soul. They work extremely hard. They do a lot of jobs that they're not supposed to do. You have to feed them well. You take care of, you give them whatever they need. They ask for a raise, give them a raise.
Because they're important for the vibe, too, it feels like. They're not just a dishwasher. They're a part of the community. And so if they ask for something, you want to respect that.
I'd rather a line cook walk offline than have my dishwasher leave. I'll tell you that much.
Are there any initiation rituals that new members of the Cult of Kitchens have to go through for acceptance?
All that stuff is part of what everyone's trying to leave behind. Back in the day at this one restaurant, like there definitely was a late night club called Man's Club. Everyone could be in Man's Club. It wasn't just for men, but you had to burn yourself with a knife. And so we all have scars, front of house, back of house. Whoever was hanging out the latest, we'd be like, Man's Club tonight? You had to burn your every time. Anyone was like, Man's Club? And then we'd all get the candle out and heat up the butter knife, and you'd heat it up, and then, because I have them all over me. But
oh my God, it's literally worse than Nexium.
That's from early 2000s. Like that was like an OG spot, all different walks of life, and everyone like loved it.
seems like everyone was proud of them
because it shows that you're a part of the cult.
We would do it at parties, and like even my wife has them. Like,
Oh my God. It trickles to the family.
we were just at this like wedding one time, and we were all talking about it, and we're all yacked out. We're in the bathroom. We're like, let's do it. We did the bride, the groom. We did like a whole crew. We did this whole thing where we just burned everyone with butter knives.
That is the cultiest shit I've ever heard.
And that's so funny.
The fact that it's trickling to the family is giving like Amway. You know, it's a family business. Do it to all your friends.
I love that you guys like did it at a place that was like celebratory. You were like, a wedding? Fuck it. Let's fucking do it.
They were still in their like ghetto. She was in her like wedding dress. Yeah, it was a funny thing.
So we're going to ask you one more question and then we're going to play a little game and then we'll wrap up. If you could snap your finger and change something about kitchen culture to make it less culty, would you do that? And if so, how?
Yeah, 100%. You would just change the mentality that you're worthless if you fucking burn a piece of bread. You're not worthless. You made a mistake and now do it again. And I think like that is the thing that becomes toxic, is the way that people handle that particular situation. When you do something wrong, rather handled with aggression, handled with empathy. Because most of the time, if you fucked up, you'd be berated verbally and physically. What's the opposite? You gas somebody up. Be like, hey, that was a big mistake. Let's try to do that again. Because every single day you're cutting onions. You know, you're slicing onions all day. And I slice the onions wrong and chef comes over, yells at me for slicing my onions wrong. What if they just gave me a little ounce of positivity instead of like calling me a fucking donkey?
Yeah. Yeah, there's just no reason why the culture has to be so militant and so sometimes abusive. It's just not necessary.
It's highly abusive. Imagine calling somebody, you're working next to somebody and they fuck up and you're like, you're a fucking idiot. Why did you just do that? Like you're doing a podcast and somebody's like, you just talked to your microphone too fucking close and it fucking sparked and you fucking made a fucking stupid move, you fucking idiot.
There's just no reason for the culture to be that. And it's like passing abuse from one generation onto the next. We just like need you to break it up, Maddie.
Yeah.
We're going to jump to a game. It's called Yes, Chef. We're going to read a list of very culty scenarios that were on the bear, that were in different scenes on the bear. And you're going to have to say whether or not you have personally witnessed or experienced one of those culty scenarios in real life. And if so, you'll just say yes, chef.
And if not, you'll say no, chef.
Right. Number 1. Being verbally berated / sworn at / verbally assaulted by the head chef while having to continue plating food.
Yes, chef.
Getting into a fist fight with someone in the middle of a shift.
Yes, chef.
Oh my God. Having a chef quit in the middle of a huge rush.
Yes, chef.
Done a back alley meat deal because your original supplier did not come through.
No, chef.
Okay. Traded vintage clothing for ingredients.
I would trade other things. I used to trade meals for drugs.
Put off processing your emotions or traumas because you were too busy with the kitchen.
Yes, chef.
Thrown up before work every morning from anxiety.
No, chef. I was ironclad.
Respect.
I figure there are other ways, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot of other ways. I wasn't a barfer.
Have an employee sell drugs out by the dumpsters.
Yes, chef.
Had a boss slap something you made directly out of your hands.
Yes, chef.
Failed a health inspection because someone left a pack of cigarettes on the gas range.
No, chef.
Last one, had to deal with everything in the restaurant breaking all throughout the course of a day. The toilet bursting, power going out, walk-in freezer repair cost for $5,000.
In some way or another, yes, chef.
Yeah.
Okay. So the long and the short of it is that the bear is 100% accurate.
Yeah.
I think it's any small business. I think it is one of those things where it is, there's a lot of stuff that you have to do to run a small family-owned business. There's no real financial stable backer or hedge fund or some bullshit, and you're in there working, putting your head down, trying to deal with everything. Leading and trying to do everything, you won't be able to do everything or lead.
Yeah.
And it's a snake eating its own tail.
Yeah.
And you'll get lost. You need a lot of amazing people to make a restaurant run soundly. Not just a chef This yes chef bullshit is the biggest bullshit in the world. When I walk into my restaurants, I'm Matty. I'm not the chef. Once again, I want to know what everybody thinks, how everybody feels. I want to know all of that. Once we collectively figure out how to make a dish better, that is our biggest concern. As a collective, what is the best that we can do to make our food the best?
I guess ideally in a kitchen, the food should be the cult leader.
It should be. I bow to flavor. It's the one true thing in the world. Our perspective and our perception of what we believe that dish is going to be different every single time somebody eats it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. If folks want to follow your cult, where can they find you?
Just Matty Matheson. I think most stuff. I'm not too sure. It doesn't matter. Don't follow me. Go follow somebody else.
I love it.
I mean, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. We had such a fun time talking to you. Just such big fans of your work.
Truly.
This has been fun. Most of the podcasts I do are just like pee-pee poo-poo podcasts. So it's nice to do something that is actually put together. It's very well produced.
We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm from Philly, and I think the cultiest thing about working in a restaurant is the phrase, if there's time to lean, there's time to clean, because God forbid a service worker sit down.
The money, the hours, like the whole culture of it, it's nearly impossible to get out, or if you try to work a normal job with it, it's hard, and it's almost devastating at some points of it.
I had a chef that would get so mad, scream at you, belittle you, call you every name in the book, even throw knives in the kitchen. If you messed up a kitchen ticket, if somebody in the back line messed up the food. But at the end of the night, at that bar, when we ponied up for our after shift drinks, we were all family.
All right, Issa, out of these 3 cult categories, live your life, watch your back, and get the fuck out. What do we think about the cult of kitchen culture?
I think it is a solid watch your back.
Gotta be.
Yeah.
Yep.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Watch your back. There might be, your onions might be burning. Behind. Yeah, it's a behind.
All the cult language in kitchen culture is low-key so fun.
Yeah.
It really does make you feel like you're a part of something special and greater than yourself.
Yeah, if you watch The Bear and a week after you weren't in the kitchen with like your roommates or your friends being like, behind. Yes, chef, my roommates and I literally spoke to each other like that for 2 weeks straight. And I think the reason it's so solidly a watch your back is because, like nonprofits, there can be good kitchens out there. We saw that with Matty saying, if you are a good chef, you never yell at someone or you never lose your temper. And hopefully like that kind of culture is changing.
Yeah, you're open to feedback. You're open to questioning. You don't want people to worship you and say, yes, chef. And hopefully chefs like Matty will, now it sounds like we worship him, but yeah, we kind of do. Hopefully, chefs like Matty will start setting the tone for the rest of the industry.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hungry, but that is our show.
Thanks so much for listening.
We'll be back with a new cult next week.
But in the meantime,
stay culty, but not too culty. Sounds Like a Cult is created, hosted, and produced by Amanda Montel and Issa Medina. Michael Dorfman is our editor.
Our podcast studio is All Things Comedy, and our theme music is by Casey Kolb. Thank you to our intern/production assistant, Noemi Griffin. Subscribe to Sounds Like a Cult wherever you get your podcasts, so you never miss an episode.
And if you like our show, feel free to give us a rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/soundslikeacult.